Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Pencils and Lipstick. I am Kat Caldwell, and this is episode 244 of the show. We are going to talk about memoirs today, and I have a wonderful guest with me to talk about writing memoirs and then how she wrote memoirs. Deborah Lucas is her name, and we are going to get into that in just a little bit. So we are already in November, and things are moving along, and if you're, in America, this sort of starts the really crazy season. We have Thanksgiving this month, and then a month later we have Christmas, and we usually have a lot of parties and all that. And I know once December hits, even Europeans and South Americans and Australians, you're all, you know, doing the holiday thing. And so if you are planning to write this season, some of you are probably still wanting to get things done before the end of the year. I think that's totally possible as long as you have a little bit of grace with yourself. One reason that I never wanted to do NaNoWriMo was because it was almost impossible for me to do. I've said this before in November. It's just so hard and so stressful, honestly. But it is not impossible to get some writing done. So you can scale back a little bit, maybe scale back on your expectations or just scale back on the stress. If one day goes by without you getting it done, it's okay. I know that we all have deadlines, things that we want to get done. I do as well. But, enjoy your season, your holiday season as well. If you're looking to do a little bit of writing, but not necessarily on a project, it's always a great idea to maybe write some stories or try your hand at poetry or maybe write the Christmas cards. I mean, all of this includes writing, right? So maybe you can write down some memories, or maybe you can gather your memoir thoughts if you want to write your memoir in 2025. Writing a memoir is really not as easy as some people think. Well, and I think some people actually have a talent for it, and it's much easier for them than the average person. But every single time that I'm working with a client on their memoir, it's actually quite a lot of work to gather your memories and your journal notes and to decide how you're going to organize it and all that. So that is what we're going to get into today, because I know quite a few of you are either working on a memoir or want to work on a memoir. And so there are some things that you should probably think about as you go through the process, and think about even before you go through the process. So we are going to talk with Deborah Lucas today. She is a memoirist and she's also a book coach, and we're just going to have a frank conversation about what writing a memoir includes. Hello, Deborah Lucas. It's so good to talk to you. We always have a good time talking, so I'm glad to have you on the show today.
I can.
I wanted to have you on because you are kind of my go-to when it comes to memoir in our coaching circle. I know there's a couple others out there as well, but you, though, let's talk from the beginning. You've done so many things, not just being a writer. So could I ask you first, like, how did you come to like the writing part of art?
My family were storytellers, and they all died way too early. I lost my brothers before my parents,
Oh, wow.
and my first memoir was triggered by my brother's illness and then his death, and so those kinds of life events. But I didn't start writing it for about, let's see, 2008, 13 years later,
Okay.
because of life events and other things still going on. But but that was a story I really wanted to tell, about how he had impacted my life and how my
Okay.
husband had impacted my life. And
So,
so
but
that's
you're a
what I
painter, right?
started.
So your
Yes.
art, was it just not enough to have it in art form? You wanted it in ink, kind of to be able to share it with people, you think?
It it's interesting because a lot of times when I've moved 50 times in 45 years before I got
Oh
here.
my
And
gosh.
we've lived here almost 30 years, the same place. And this is when we moved here is where my book ends. Um, but it's like you want to tell somebody your story, but it's too
Yeah.
complex. How do you do
Okay.
that, you
Yeah.
know? And so, that's basically it. But the challenge with memoir is paring it down to being not autobiography,
Okay.
but a slice or a section or a point or one container so that you can tell a story that's not all over the place.
Yeah. So
You
did
know,
you know that
it's
when your brother, like your brother's story, I'm sure is very intricately woven with yours, with your
yes.
parents, with all that. Did it start out like I want to tell this whole story with my brother included, or did you know that you wanted it niched down to your brother first? Like how
Oh no, that
instinctual
came
was
much
that?
later, much later.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, it was Jenny Nash that helped at a retreat that triggered that because she kept
Okay.
pushing me about the container and the present timeline instead of all, the backstory and all the other
Yeah.
things. So I've split my book twice,
Okay. Oh, wow.
almost in half, because I'm a
Okay.
long writer and I needed to get the words down, but I also needed to get that what's it about?
Yeah.
If you can't answer that in a couple of sentences, you don't know yet what your book is about. But that doesn't mean you can't start writing.
Right. Oh, that's a good point. So
Yes,
you were
yes.
writing and then you found this. Right, well,
I, I had 130,000 words.
oh my gosh. If you can't see me,
Not
I'm
hard for me.
no, I mean that's just it. Like words are not difficult for me either, but I feel I'm trying to encapsulate this for people who might be like I was, and it sounds like maybe you were, of like, I have this story to tell, and words are not actually difficult to get on the page. But as you said, you went to a retreat where she kept pushing you with this question. Some sort of question usually comes up when you really start digging, if you don't give up. And and you say, well, I want to get this out, but it's not right. What's the point? And I feel like memoir people are going to say, my life is the point. So is that not enough?
No, and Jenny said some things about that shocked me at first, but I totally get it now. She would say, about somebody would tell her that somebody died in their life, and she would, okay, so what?
Oh, that
And
feels harsh.
that's it's very harsh, but it makes the point. Who hasn't almost
Okay.
had somebody die in their life? So what
Okay.
makes your story worth telling and worth reading? You're asking your readers to take a chunk of time out of their life to read your story. What are they going to get out of it? What are you going to share with them? How are you going to um, help them in their own personal journeys and
Mm.
struggles?
So then how did you find that point? Because that feels very uncomfortable. Like you go to a writing retreat and she's like, but what's your point? Because I can see the point of maybe if you already knew that you're writing about your brother, like let's say let's make something like if I'm writing about my parents' divorce, like you said, like a lot of people have this history and you go, okay, but my point is I want to help others process the divorce. Like but that too is not enough. So how was that process for you of like that discomfort of that continual question on like this is
Well,
my
as
life.
as Jenny would say, it's iterative. In other words, you
Okay.
would start in one place, and then after a
Yeah.
while, after you would tell people or somebody would read your writing or whatever, then you'd say something else. It's like, oh, okay, that's a better what's it about, right? And then you would
Uh,
write and revise and, have somebody else read it. And then they'd ask you questions and you'd answer them. And it's like, oh no, that's what it's about. So it's really not about my brother. He's the
mm,
trigger and the framework or
okay.
the container for the story.
Yeah.
But the story is about me overcoming an unstable childhood and gaining the confidence to claim my life of creativity and with horses
Yeah.
and finding home.
Oh,
But
that see,
along
that's very interesting.
along the way,
Yeah.
I was having to make hard choices
Yeah.
between what my dream was and my brother's needs.
Right.
So, an example is when I was had just gotten my undergraduate degree in Indiana with my husband, and I had signed up for grad school, and it didn't get the one I wanted. I was waitlisted, but I was going to go to Purdue and then, switch the next year, whatever. But I was like
Okay.
eager. I was going to do this. And I wasn't a kid at that point. I was 37 when I got my undergraduate degree. And so, and also I studied another area of architecture before that, but I came back to art because
Mm.
it was my true love. So I found out that my brother was ill, and I talked to
Mm.
my husband, and we dropped our whole life. We sold our lovely little home, and he got a transfer, and somehow I got into grad school in LA, and we just picked up and moved within a couple of months, just
Oh, wow.
totally. And those are the kinds of things that the hard choices that I was facing, and how did I cope with that? How did I deal with that?
Right.
um and that's the story,
Yeah.
and you can persevere, you can find the life of your dreams even with a lot of stuff going on in your life or your
Yeah.
family or
Yeah.
illness or death or whatever. Hang on to it, persevere, you will get there.
Yeah. The like, that sounds like a big love. Like you could almost, this is what I find hard about memoir is you don't necessarily understand how to find that context until you really have been pushed by someone. Like,
Yes.
very few people come to this naturally. There are some natural memoirists who, I mean, and I would almost call them essayists. Like, they somehow have put their personal life and they're just very good about being introspective and vulnerable, you know?
Right.
But for the most of us, we have maybe one, maybe two memoirs that we want to write because something impactful has come. But a lot of times, we don't really know how to be introspective like when we're writing it. And so at first it becomes it's about our brother, right? It's about like I gave up something to go, you know, and my brother impacted me. But that only really gets so far and so deep, right? So how were you introspective at this point at 37 where you were like were you living it in a that thing in such a way that was like I know what I'm doing, or was it just about like my brother's sick, I'm gonna go. I love him so much. I'm gonna go, and I don't know what I'm trying to ask. Like, how aware were you that like you were giving up a lot in your life to go be with him?
I was aware of it, but it wasn't that big of a thing because you got to remember how much I
Really?
moved, how many times I
Okay.
moved, how many times I had to restart my life from very young all the way up until really until I met Greg in my early 30s. And then we still had a few moves in us after that. But that for me wasn't hard. The
Okay.
hard part is to be able to share with a reader um, why I would make that choice. And they need to know
Okay.
a little bit about me, but they can't know about my 50 moves, right? So that's where it's hard
Right.
for writing a
Ah,
memoir. How
okay.
do I help them understand why that's not so hard for me and
Yeah.
why I tend to be impulsive like that
Okay.
and confident that I'll figure it out because I built this muscle, emotional muscle growing up. I didn't have a choice. I had to figure out how to start over, how to find friends, you know, and how to feel like a sense of belonging. And I had to do it over and over and
And
over
over
again.
again. Yeah.
But how do I help them to understand? And then how is it different now? What changed in
Right.
me to make the memoir worth
Yeah.
telling?
Okay.
How did I get that introspection as a whole to have my
Yeah.
emotional chart? How did I, after moving 50 times, move and stay in one place for 30 years?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
That's what it's about.
Right. And that's like, oh, I feel like that's that's about the age when women, we tend to like take a breath and look around us and go like, wait, what am I doing? Maybe. So when you decided to write this, because you've worked with horses, you're an artist, you're a painter. Are you a sculptor as well?
Yes, so I
Yes.
have 2 degrees in clay and ceramics.
So
Yes.
you have this many mediums in which you express your emotions and you express what you're thinking and feeling and doing all that.
Mm.
But you said that it took you a couple of years to decide that you wanted to write about your brother, I guess, at first. So how many years past this experience of picking up and moving did you actually put pen to paper or, words to a computer?
Actually, I was writing with the intention of writing his story
Okay.
um, when he was dying, basically.
Okay.
And I was talking, like I would be traveling across the country and I'd run into people and I talk easily with people. And I ran into this guy that was a writer and he was asking me about it. And I already knew I was
Okay.
writing the book. Yes, I knew that I had to do that, but I wasn't sure what kind of envelope or what it would look like or
Okay.
why it mattered. I didn't know any of the
Yeah,
substance of
yeah.
it. I just knew that I have an exceptional family, and basically, I could write a book about all 4 of them
Yeah.
easily, easily. They each have a special story. So material has never been a challenge for me. It's how to focus in on one story, stay with that,
Yeah.
and work it to where it's within a container, but it's also deep. You've got to go
Yeah.
deep.
Okay.
And the other challenge that I gave myself, I first wrote this in memoirs first person, but I wrote it in past tense. And then I rewrote it in present tense.
Oh, and why did you do
And
that?
because there was something about the immediacy,
Okay.
and I think it was something that I wanted to do originally, but I was, instructed by people who, because I didn't know what I was doing,
Right.
you should do it this way, right? So you listen to them.
Yeah.
And but the that makes it a little more difficult for the reflection because you are living each
Oh,
of those scenes at the age of that scene, of that
okay.
protagonist in that scene.
Yeah.
So, you know, the reflection all comes at the end. So how do you communicate what's going on internally? It's a real challenge.
It is a this sounds okay, this sounds like anyone who's listening is like, "Oh my gosh." Okay, so how then you're I mean, and this happens, right? You live a life, you might be writing or journaling or whatever, and you think, I'm going to write a
Mhm.
book. And I don't think a lot of us think, well, that's not too hard until they sit down in front of the blank screen. Or maybe maybe it's the blank screen, or maybe it's getting a lot of words like you and being like, okay, but, you know, where am I going with this? So how did you find the container of this book, as you call it? How did you come to this conclusion of like, because you got to leave so much out, right? If you're like, once you find that container. So how,
Yes, yes, and actually, as I'm finishing it to, like final draft to get ready to publish, I there's still some things I need to trim, and because there's so many places where I wanted to go deeper in terms
okay.
of the emotion of the scene and the details of the scene. And so you do that, your word count gets a little high. So it's like, okay, what is there something that I can pull out that's not as important? That's a little bit of a duplication in terms of what it's communicating to the reader.
Okay, so when you're going deeper, you're adding more words, which might
More
force you to
words.
trim.
Yes, yes. And that's the breathing of a manuscript. I think any writer goes through that. Once you get the first draft, then it's a matter of you go in and you cut and then you add, and sometimes in the same, in terms of revision,
Mm-hmm.
that all within one. But then a lot of times so you'll show it to somebody. See, I've been going to conferences since 2008, and I've been
Mm-hmm.
pitching since 2008 because they were kind enough to like help me, to teach
Mm-hmm.
me what it is that helped me to speak clearly about what the story was about. And
Right.
as that refined. And then I was finding my teachers. And so finding Jenny Nash was huge. Finding Allison K. Williams was huge. Finding my critique groups have been huge.
Mm.
Um, and as a writer, if you want to write, the most important thing you can do is start looking for a community, whether it's online or in your community, especially for memoir writers, because we
Okay.
are so different from
Okay.
all the others. Different, and yet we are similar because it's nonfiction
Mm-hmm.
to be memoir, but it's written like a novel.
Right. Right.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
contemporary memoir. This is contemporary
Yeah.
memoir,
Yeah.
dialogue, all of that.
Right.
So you draw from all those different directions. So you can learn from just reading anything or talking to any author.
So you're saying specifically a memoir critique group, like where the other writers are writing memoir?
Doesn't have to be, but it's
Mm.
helpful if you at least have one other person that's writing memoir so they get
Right.
what you're doing.
They kind of get what they, and that I think is one issue I see with memoir every time I'm asked to edit it, is um, it's hard to trim it because I think sometimes they think everything needs to be there for the reader to understand. But you've said a few times like it's more about going deeper than kind of
Mhm.
giving the whole life. And that is, I agree with you. I think it is just iterations of learning the craft almost more than anything because the story you already have. Like, unlike fiction writers, you don't have to find the story's already there. It's finding like almost like how to get it across to the reader without banging them over the head
Right.
with your day-to-day
Right.
copies.
Yeah. Show, don't tell.
It's so hard though
It is.
because you are telling a story, right? So it
No, you're
hmm.
not. See, you
You're
have to think
showing
of it
it.
as a
Okay.
movie. This is the
Oh,
best
okay.
thing that I've heard. It's a movie. It's the
Okay.
movie of your life. And as in movies, they jump from one scene to the other. They leave out a lot in between.
They leave out a
And
lot.
as long as they do it in such a way as we can go with them, it's
Mm.
fine. No big deal. And the way to bring your reader with you when you make a jump is to anchor them in time and place
Okay.
and who's in the scene when you
Okay.
start, and then you can just go. And whether you fill in some of those things from in between or you don't, doesn't matter.
Huh.
So you can do that as that next scene, but you got to know what the scene's about. Just like the book overall, you need to know, okay, what is this scene for? What is it doing for the entire story? What piece is it? So that without it, the puzzle doesn't fit, right?
Right, right. So do you teach, so you're a long writer as you call yourself. I call myself an overwriter. I think it's the same thing. When you're
Yeah.
teaching people to write, do you teach them to know what the scene is to like analyze if the scene is needed or not before they write it? Or are you kind of more on like write and then we'll reanalyze if the scene needs to go? How do you teach that when you have your students?
Well, I do use the author accelerator tools, at least the heart of them
Hmm.
about what's it about, why is it important, and then yeah, knowing the key tent poles, as we call them, 3 or 4 or 5 scenes that give you a sense of where the story is.
Mm,
And then the hard part about that after that is there a beginning and end change for the protagonist, for you? What
mm.
kind of emotional, change is there?
That's where your
Arc of emotional
introspection comes,
change.
right?
Yeah, arc of emotional change. But you have to be able to know that so that you can put the right scenes in. Because if they're
Yeah.
not supporting that part of the story, You can fill in other things later, but you've got to have those tent poles about that
Mm.
story. So I try to get them to do that. And if that's really a struggle for them, I go, okay, tell me a story that's within your manuscript. And start talking about it. I go, okay, write that in scene.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's where I start them.
Yeah.
That is a hard lesson for a lot of people because we weren't ever taught to write in scene unless somebody was a movie maker in our family.
Right, right. So, I mean, I'm finding a lot, I love working with women over 55 because they have a story to tell. A lot of it. I mean, I live outside of DC and I wish I could grab every woman around here and be like, "Please tell your story." Because our society does not respect women enough once they're retired, I think, in my own opinion, to ask them about their story. But I mean, there are amazing women around here. So I do think there's so many women now, thankfully, um, wanting to write their story. And
Right.
I have seen one struggle for women, for my clients, and I've only had a couple, but to organize the either the journals or things, or just to organize their life and then to sit down and write it. So what do you tell women like that? Because they could be executives, they could have been ambassadors, and they had a certain way to organize all that, right? And their family or whatever else they were doing. So how did you learn how to organize the writing, which is sitting and getting the words down there? How did you do it, or how do you help your clients do that?
Um, Number one, I'm not sure leaning on the journals at the beginning
Oh.
is effective, at least for me. I think it's more resource material.
Hmm.
I think that if you don't know your story in the top of your head, the basics of it, then you haven't found your story yet. I mean, if
Okay.
you need to read your journals in order to remind yourself of where you were, and then you can look at where you are and you can see what big change there is, then that's great. If you need that inspiration, most women know what their story is, just like you were
Right.
saying.
Right.
So it's a matter of uh, starting with what the story is, a paragraph of what the story is, right? That's part
Hmm.
of the blueprint. And then it's like, okay, where would it start?
Mm.
Where are you? What year it is? How old are you? What's the description of the place? Who's there? And what's that scene? What's happening? Write
Yeah.
that for me.
Right. Just getting them to write then.
Yeah, and that can be tough, but they
Yeah.
get really excited once they have a beginning
Yeah.
place, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so sometimes, we ask them to do the end, but sometimes that's a little bit tough. So I just say, okay, so, to tell this story that you've told me, this is what your story is. Um, what are the key points that got you there? Just kind of tell me in a sentence or two what this chapter would be, what this chapter would be, or scene that would be, and this one would be. And if I can get that
Mm.
out of them and written down on paper, and I'll help them if I need to, um, they're good to go because then
Yeah.
it'll all just fill itself in.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder sometimes if the journals and the memorabilia is sometimes just a procrastination tool because it's scary. I mean, you're about to write your story for like anyone who wants to pick it up can read it, right? Like, so
Yeah.
I want to acknowledge like that is a little scary. Um, but gosh, like the girls to come need your story. They need these
Yes.
like the new generation thinks that they're the first to like do things. It's just like, no, you're not. There are like women have done amazing things. We were not all barefoot in the kitchen. Like that's just not
We
that.
need
I
to
know some
take
of
a
your
women's
stories,
history
so I know for
class.
sure that but I think they think women's history is like far away from them. Oh, those are like the unicorns of the history. Those women got in the history books, but the truth is the women are like the everyday woman
Mhm.
has done a lot of stuff. Like there's at least one to many stories in her. I mean,
Yeah.
just amazing things that women have gone through in this country alone. Um, I could go on and on. I just write your stories, but so I do wonder if sometimes the journals. I like how you have them just sort of write that first scene, because then I think it is a muscle to be worked, right? Like the more we
Right.
work out a certain muscle, the
Right.
more
Right.
comfortable
Right.
we are. But I want to ask you about structure. How important is it to know the structure of your memoir? Like, is it, do you sit and think about, like, there are many ways that you could, I mean, you could
Yeah.
write letters to your dad who's deceased, or you could write like the three-act structure, or you could write, beginning at the end and then go forward. Like, so how important is that at the beginning, I guess, or at what point is it important?
I think with memoir, there's often different timelines. Like
Okay.
there's this contemporary timeline that kind of triggered the story, right? Something
Okay.
happened to me as an adult and it made me think about back when I was younger. And so then there's
Mm,
that timeline. And so the structure is, how do you want to integrate those? Do
mm,
you want to tell them
okay.
sequentially? Do you want to weave them? And and the other part that's really hard is when you tell me what you think you want to do, I'm going to ask you why.
Ah,
What is that structure doing for your
okay.
story? What does that give you? And so, but see, structure is, there's usually easier to start with a simpler structure. Mine
Okay.
is, well, okay, so Allison K. Williams has this, I'd never heard it before her, is the E structure, where you
Hmm.
start someplace in the, present or in the middle, and then you go back and tell all of the story that came before, and
Oh,
then and then you continue from that point and finish the story.
interesting.
Yeah.
I
And
could
I
see
like
how
that
that would
structure.
help some people.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because I think
Yeah.
that we can get caught up in the structure, the organization, however you want to call it. I mean,
Mhm.
as coaches, we call it structure. It can be a little debilitating, right? To be like,
Yeah. Yeah.
where do I start? Where do I go now? Like, how should it be? Because
How many times have we rewritten our first chapter?
yes,
Right.
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
So, and then how, when we go back to like getting critiques on it, because if you haven't been a writer your whole life, let's say, I mean, we all write, right? Like we are all writing. Um, but maybe it was a different kind of writing that you did, and now you're doing memoir. And like you said, it's kind of fiction, fictionalized in the sense like you add dialogue and you're looking for the story arc and stuff.
And scene, right.
And the theme, like that's a lot to learn, right? So when you're coming to critiques, how like how wide should you cast your net? How personal should you take it? How much should you follow the critique? Like what has been your experience in the good, the bad, and the ugly of getting
Getting
of
feedback on
sharing
your own work.
on your own work? Yeah.
I think the one thing you have to look out for is when somebody starts telling you how they would write the story.
Oh, that's a good point. Just
The
discard that, right?
yeah. um, the important thing is for them to give impressions of what they are seeing,
Mm,
and when they fall out of the story, when it's like, all that backstory, and so they're just, you lose interest, right, and you want to go do something else.
okay.
um, the other thing is for them to ask questions. Those are the
Okay.
gold.
Do you
Do you have a
form the
question?
questions? Oh, do you
No, no,
ask?
I let them. Do you have any questions? Is there any missing?
Okay.
Or da, da, and oh, they're ready with the questions. Well, why did you do this? And well, what's this mean? And what's really going? And they've got all. And who's this person?
Oh, I
And
can see
so
how that's helpful.
yes, and it keeps triggering you having to answer that. You answer it a little bit to them, but more so in the writing. And then you have to step back and look at it and say, okay, is that the story I want to tell? Is that working for me? Because if not, toss it out.
Oh, okay. So you ask them a question. Do you have
You
questions?
let,
They
Yeah, yeah. Just let them read it. Let them read something
Okay.
of your writing, the first 50 pages. I mean, that's the goal, right?
Right, right. Yes.
And then everybody says usually you have to chop off the first 30 or something
Oh man,
because we have all that backstory stuff
all the
that we're
backstory.
trying to get into. And again, that's why we write more like fiction because the audience is a little more impatient these days, some a
Yeah.
lot. We were talking
Yeah.
about that this morning. And so how do you get into the action?
Yeah.
If you're stuck in backstory, you're not in the action. So you've
Right.
got to figure out what action you're going to start with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
that's got to tell them what this story is
is
about.
about right, right. Because there is a difference between memoir and biography.
Oh, huge,
Okay, so
huge,
what is the
huge.
difference?
Biography is your whole life, and biography is this happened and this happened and this happened and this happened
Mm,
and this happened, and there it's like a chronological thing. There's no impactful connection between one and the other, and we talk about this all the time. You write a scene, what's it about, and then why does it matter, and then because of or ends so what happens as a result of some of
mm,
those actions. And they could be just internal struggles, but
right,
you make a choice or you don't make a choice or, whatever. But those choices that you make in your life, those are the important transitions from one scene to the next. And
right.
if they have no connection or it's not evident in the writing, then it's not memoir.
Interesting. Okay. Because I was obsessed with biographies when I was a teenager of the old black and white Hollywood. But I can see how a biography of someone famous kind of
Mhm.
makes sense because you kind of want to see they were born here. This is what their childhood was like. This is da, 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 da. But I might not know Deborah Lucas. And so going from the moment that Deborah was born might not
It's
hook.
too much.
You're like,
Too
please.
much for me.
So for the memoir, what we're still looking at is that hook, almost like like you said, a fiction book where we're still so are the readers fiction readers as well? Pretty like they know what they're looking for when they pick up the memoir book.
It's funny. I mean, I know nonfiction is kind of separate. There are people that just love nonfiction and they don't like
Yeah.
anything else. And there are people that have a prejudice against memoir, and I'm not really sure that they realize what memoir is like these
Right.
days.
They might think it's
Um,
biography.
no, if they think it's biography, it's trouble. If they think it's fiction, because that's the thing. I
Mm,
could take my book and I could take it into the Women's Fiction Writers Association and say, oh, this is fiction. It would work.
okay.
It would totally work because I've
Yeah.
written it like a fiction story.
Right.
It's just that it's all true. And I want to claim that it's all true, that
Right, right,
that
right.
happened to me. And that's why I am a dedicated memoir writer. I have written fiction. I've got two manuscripts from stories from my own life, but I kind of recreated a protagonist other than me and, gave her
Mm-hmm.
similar challenges. It's that same thing of a lost girl who gets saved by horses. That's kind of my
Nice.
favorite theme.
Yeah, I like that theme. Well, because it's true. But yeah, so memoir, you're kind of hooking, you're kind of looking for the same grabbing attention as anybody who would read fiction, but you're claiming it as your own.
Yes,
And I like that
yes.
definition. Are there do you think a memoir writer or a writer like if you're wanting to write a memoir, then you're a memoir writer, should they read memoirs? Or should they just
I think
write?
it's important to read
Oh,
memoir.
you do.
I
Okay.
think it is. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's some really fabulous ones out there. Um, and I think it is because the for the I had this too. My first conference, I went in and I said, so if I tell everybody the truth, then they might not like me. Should I do that? And he goes, get over that now. Get over that now. Put it all in there because if you skip over some of the stuff, your reader will see the whole. and
Oh,
know that you left it out. So just
yeah.
get over that now. You're going to put it all in there. You're going to, cry your eyes out while you're writing, typing and all that. Well, that's great, because you are reliving each
Yeah.
scene as you're writing because you're getting into that self that was living that. That's the best way to write. Just like we,
Mm-hmm.
with a fiction, you get into your character's head and you become that character and you respond to things based on,
Yeah.
I mean, you're living in storyland, right?
Yes.
When you're writing, which is a
Yes,
great place to live.
it is.
So, yeah,
So you
yeah.
just get over. I agree
Just
that
get over it. Yeah.
the best memoirs are the memoirs that really make you they're so vulnerable. Like I think
Yes.
Crying in H Mart is one of those memoirs where I was like, she's so brave because it's not that you aren't going to have like your struggles with your mother don't go away just because she's dying of cancer. Like that is like one of like you still have to work through all this, but she's so brave and so many most memoirists are very brave to like show their humanity,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And
Cheryl Strayed is a classic of that for Wild,
yeah,
because she showed all of her huge mistakes and all of the things that would be really easy to be embarrassed about, and she
yeah,
just laid it all out there. And for how she ruined her marriage and how she got it, just all the things.
yeah,
And the core of the story is how she came to terms with all of that and her mother's death.
yeah, yeah.
And she even threw the death of a horse in there, right?
Yes. But I
So,
mean, that's so real.
yeah, yeah,
Like
yeah,
a lot of us are just walking through life, and the minute that it smacks us, like to be able to find your mistakes and to be able to write it out there because the
yeah.
reality is some I won't swear jerk is going to write a bad review because oh my gosh, I can't believe that
Yeah.
you were mean or whatever, or you didn't forgive your mom right away or what. Like who cares? That person has issues that they're not willing to
Right.
deal with.
Bad reviews are a badge of honor.
Exactly, because most people are going to see
Everybody
the
gets them.
like the I feel like you're as you're writing the memoir, you're getting even more healing. And then as somebody reads it, they're getting healing. And it's like
Yes.
this beautiful connection. You might not
Yes.
ever meet your readers, but that they're getting a healing that you got as you wrote it. It's just it's pretty
It
amazing.
is. It is really cool. And also, I want to let people know that even though there's some really intense stories out there as memoir, there's also the softer, gentler ones. I
Mm.
mean, it's like the difference between a Natasha Trethewey Memorial Drive about her stepfather killing her mother.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and it's very visceral, and the abuse that she went through at the hands of her stepfather, and um, and then there's like Joyce Maynard, who, I mean, The Best of Us and At Home in the World. And of course, she has that one. It's her time with J.D. Salinger, which is really kind of interesting. It's how
Yeah.
she got into memoir. Um, but one of her recent novels, Bird Hotel, I just love it because it's got a lot of stuff in it, but it's easier access for everybody. We did it in the book club, and everybody liked it,
Yeah.
right? And that's the way she writes her memoirs. Um, the old classic Jeanette Walls, Glass Castle. And when I started writing, everybody goes, "Oh, Glass Castle, Glass Castle." um, I mean, that was my first count.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean
So
that
anyway, there's one of my favorites is about a woman who is a horsewoman, and she goes into this prison that is not really in the prison. It's separate. It's a ranch with horses, and prisoners are taking care of the horses.
oh cool.
And they're really screwing up a lot. And the horses that they get are also really broken emotionally and physically and all of that. And it's this amazing story. Here, let me see. Um, It's a Ginger Gaffney half broke, and how she relates the stuff that she's helping them with and seeing, both the horses and the people, to her own life.
Wow, that's
And there's
very
this,
cool.
I mean, I haven't read it in years, but there's this pivotal scene in a little like quick shop.
Hmm.
And it's so visceral, but it's like she's in this little store, right?
Yeah,
It's not
yeah,
like there's a shooting or anything going on. And that's when you really are grabbing those emotions and
yeah.
just you've got your reader in your hands like that. That's what you would
Right.
like to do. Yeah.
Well, you make a really good point that a memoir doesn't have to be about death. It doesn't have to
No.
be about something really, or you've
Yeah.
done something horrible or somebody else has done something horrible.
Right.
Memoir is really a reflection on something that you've gone through, right? And that has touched you and changed you significantly.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's gonna change the
Yeah.
reader. So yeah, I really want you're correct. We got to make sure people know that. I don't want you to like throw away your manuscript. Somebody who's listening
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh,
No.
there's not
No.
like some crazy thing." That's not true. I think it's also really important to understand those, I guess, quote unquote, quieter stories or not so
Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
heavy traumatic stories.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of women probably listening, or maybe this is being shared among them, and I work with a lot of women hitting retirement age or past retirement age, and they want to get this done. And I have heard some women saying, um, well, I don't know if it's really worth it to get it done. Um, nobody wants to hear my story. It kind of different iterations of this, or maybe I won't have enough time. Maybe I won't get it done in time. You never know what's going to happen. I hear many things, and I still encourage them. But what do you encourage people with when you hear women saying, trying to maybe make up excuses not to write their memoir?
Well, as Jenny said in this conference that I heard, she was the speaker, and she said, a keynote speaker, and she said, if you can quit writing, quit right now, quit, because it's way hard. But if you can't quit, if you
Mm,
are compelled to write and you have a story to tell, it's like, come along with me. And the important part is to just not give up.
mm,
Just and keep problem solving. If somebody says they have a problem with something, start searching for a solution. How, and about there's so many women publishing at 80, so many at 80 first
wow.
memoir, debut memoirs. And one of my favorite authors, Abigail Thomas, she's been writing for a long time, but her book, Still Life at 80.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's it's great. I mean, I love women who are telling their story with clarity and passion
yeah,
and they didn't stop because of their age. They didn't let anybody stop them.
exactly.
Another
Yeah.
thing about letting people stop you is people say they'll give you rules, right? You
Mm,
can't do this, you can't do that, or that's wrong. Don't listen to them.
mm-hmm.
You can do anything if you can pull it off well.
Ooh,
There's somebody out there breaking every single rule, right?
yeah,
And so if you have a reason for why you're doing it that way, stick to your guns and then look for somebody that can help you along that way to, make it stronger, clearer, whatever. Book
yeah,
coaches are great, but if not that, a writing group is wonderful.
yeah, absolutely. I love that. Um, where can people find you? Do you talk about memoir and writing somewhere where they can sort of follow you and continue to we will have links to your website in the
Okay.
in the show notes, and I'll put some of these books in there as well. But how can they keep following you?
A great way is to sign up for my newsletter. Well, there's actually
Okay.
kind of two versions of that. One is my monthly, which is longer, and I use pictures in that. And pictures, you were talking about pictures
Yes.
earlier because they are so helpful to be able to trigger a story in you. So, I
Oh,
start my newsletter, I pull out some pictures, and I go, oh, okay, I'll write that, and and it just comes out, right? So pictures are
yeah.
very useful. So that you sign up for that on my website, which is deborahannlucas.com. And I also have coaching pages in there if you're interested, but there's also just a lot in there about my art and my life on the ranch, my life with horses and all of that. So I'm just all out there on my
Yes.
memoir all the time. The other place that I write is for Substack,
Mm.
which is deborahannlucas.substack.com.
I,
And
I like that you're easy to find.
if you
I
can
go,
spell my name right, it's the old-fashioned way of spelling Deborah. And there's no E on the end of Ann.
oh man, okay, never mind. You're done. All these rules. We will have the links in the show notes.
Okay, great.
But I love how you're also a great example of you don't have to set aside maybe who you were or who you are outside of writing and only be a writer here. I love how you incorporate all of your loves and your passions
Mm-hmm.
in not only your writing but your newsletter and your website. I think that's a great example, right? For we don't have to
Mm-hmm.
compartmentalize just because we've
Yeah.
decided to write a book.
Well, especially with memoir, is how you find your readers is by telling your story. And
Mm,
so people are going to be drawn to me because they like me.
yeah,
Right. And
yeah,
those are going to be my readers. And it's a slow way to build a readership, but it's a solid way to do it.
yeah,
And so I'm just out there being me. I don't worry about being right anymore. I'm just being authentically me as much as I possibly can. And it took me 60 years to figure that out. Maybe a little more.
takes us all a little bit longer, but I mean,
Hopefully not. We're going to try and help folks, read some of
yes,
these memoirs and it won't take them quite so long.
exactly, exactly. I love that. So we will have the links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Deborah. We'll probably have to have you on again because we might get questions about even more about memoir, but I hope that
Oh,
we helped
I'd love it. I'd
help
love it.
people.
Thank you. This
Yes.
has been delightful, Kat. You are great to just chat with
That's
anytime.
why I
You're
bring you
right.
on so that you can just compliment me.
Oh, come on. You're the best. We all know
Okay.
that.
We'll talk to you soon, Deborah.
Okay. Thanks.